Hi everyone, and welcome to today's expert session hosted by DigitalWell Ventures. We're really glad to have you with us this morning. And I think I met most of you before, but for those I haven't, my name is Lise Bergqvist, and I'm a startup advisor at DigitalWell Ventures. And today we'll be diving into a highly relevant and timely topic. So we invited Daniel Melin from Safespring, who will guide us through how geopolitical changes are shaping cloud service choices and what that means for a startup like yours. And there will be time for questions and discussions at the end. So feel free to note down anything you like to ask along the way. And today's session will be recorded as usual, so you'll be able to watch it afterwards or share it with your team. So with that, over to you, Daniel. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Lisa. And nice to meet you all, even though I don't see many of you. So I'll just think, so starting to try to share again. Let's see. Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Good. So thanks again for inviting me to do this little talk. I talk quite a lot about these kind of issues, and in some media stuff lately about this topic. First, sort of, you see my name there and my email address. Feel free to contact me afterwards if you're interested or you have more questions or other interest in Safespring. So I think so. First off, Safespring is a Swedish cloud services company. We sell infrastructure as a service and some platform. We are owned by our employees and our board, so we don't have any ownership from any other country at all. We do our cloud services in Sweden and in Norway, and all our employees are based in the European Union. So there are many cloud providers that can sell you sort of the same kind of services, but as we will see in what I will talk about, what sort of how the company is set up matters a lot. And that is what comes into the geopolitical landscape. And the other thing, just to mention sort of who I am, who are you listening to? I do work as a business developer at Safespring. I've been doing that for a little bit over a year. Before that, I was at the Swedish Tax Agency, Skatteverket, doing strategy stuff. But mainly, I was working with the issues around how could the government and government as a whole, so all governmental agencies, how could they be able to operate even during crisis and even war? And that is a thing that we have for a long time we have never really discussed it in Sweden because there has never been a reason to, because IT is post Second World War, and so that's one thing, and we've all been living in the age of eternal peace, as the joke goes. But now we're in a dilemma where we see that as many countries and Sweden in particular is highly digitalized, and most of the services that we use and the whole of government is based on IT solutions, and we don't have analog versions of a lot of things anymore. So, and when then with Ukraine, which I will delve a little bit more into, we see a new risk, a lot of risk, but we see the definite military threat and then cyber threat especially from Russia, but also from some other countries. And that made the government realize that the way IT is done within the government is probably not optimal during the threat that we see today. So that was sort of what I mainly was working with at the tax agency, and that is interesting to you, but because it says something about me, or sort of the kind of mindset I have and how I think and how I perceive risk and how I look at geopolitical things. So it's highly risk-based, and I do see that Sweden already is in some kind of semi-state of war, especially with Russia. And we have to live with that probably for quite a long time. So with that introduction, so you know a little bit who I am, let's go into things. And as I said, already mentioned with Ukraine, the full-scale invasion of Ukraine has changed lots of things in Sweden and in the world as a whole, of course, and for Ukraine specifically, of course. But what it has changed has changed a lot of things about warfare, has changed about cyber warfare. What we don't, small note, is what we don't see so much in Sweden or in Swedish news is the amount of cyber attacks that Russia carries out towards Ukraine on a daily basis is staggering. I've heard from some cybersecurity experts that the level of cybersecurity awareness and how they tackle it in Ukraine is of many levels above what Sweden can do today. So that's what happens when you're in war. You have to do things, and very, very quickly. And Ukraine has adapted quite well in this regard. And they have to tackle sort of this enormous flood of different kinds of cyber attacks. And we're not talking like DDoS attacks or simple stuff. Russia is a highly qualified attacker with lots of resources, and they try to attack everything within Ukraine's infrastructure, like electricity grid, like water supplies, like logistics, everything. And that is the new reality we have to face. And that also means we have to take that into account, that if Russia will do more hostilities towards Sweden, we have to realize that everything in Swedish society will be a target. Everything that can bring us down or halt us or make us work in a worse way or similar. It's quite depressing to think about, but it is what it is. But Ukraine has also changed a lot about how different other countries act and react because of that. And that is also interesting when things change. That we've been living in a global world with global trade, and especially with the European Union as the sort of the global champion of free trade. And that whatever company has the best product or best service to the best price should be the one selling, at least in theory. But now we see that is not always how we could measure things. There's so many other parameters that is involved. We'll get back to that in a while. Is this sort of understandable for everyone, or am I speaking on a too high level or too low level? I can't see you, so you have to speak up.
It's a very good level.
Okay, at least one voice. Thank you.
Yes.
The other big change that we see is, of course, the United States, and especially this year since the new administration with Trump took charge, and all the changes, and we're fed with it every day with new things coming from the United States and coming from the Trump administration, with new decisions and so forth. I will not sort of go into that, and it's an ever-moving target. And sometimes people just get fed up there as well, but by all the things they don't understand, and that's fully reasonable. But what we do have to take into account is the more general trends and also what we think we can see will happen in the United States. And what is, you could always say all kinds of things that tomorrow there will maybe be aliens landing in my backyard. Sure, it's not impossible, but it's highly unlikely. But we can see a lot of other things in the United States without consorting to sort of crazy theories. So what we can see is the trend that the United States will much more be focused internally, the America First stuff, and we see more legislation and more orders coming that way, that the Trump administration really wants United States to be much wealthier and bring back industrialization in the United States and bring back factory workers and lots of other things. But that comes all, of course, at the expense of global trade and globalization when they go much more internally than what we're used to, which has been the United States very aggressively going externally and try to influence and export stuff. And what that means is a much higher pressure on American companies, what they do and what they don't do, and we will see lots of changes. I think we'll see lots more changes coming, and where before we could say that, well, we could always challenge things in court, or there are other avenues to go by. But what we see now is that the legal system is becoming dismantled. Judges are being replaced with loyalist judges. So that's one of the attacks that we see. And that means that before we could maybe say, we can always go to court and we can sue the government and so forth. That is maybe true today, but it's doubtful if it will be true tomorrow or in a very short amount of time. The other important thing I would say is regarding United States as a democracy. There is this global democracy index, which is funny stuff. Is that it's managed by the University of Gothenburg. But they have the democracy index, and they do that once a year, and they set a list with evaluation on a democracy index. And there's a threshold you have to pass to be even considered a functioning democracy. And what the researchers say is that in a couple of months they doubt that the United States will pass the threshold for a well-functioning democracy anymore. And that is, of course, a really, really big change that affects lots of things. So we have to sort of bear this in mind, and this is all very sad to even discuss all of this, but this is reality and some of the more important stuff about reality as I see, and it's not just take my word for it. I think lots of it, I guess you already knew, and the rest it's easy to look up if you like it and delve more into these things. Then comes the other part, and that was also part of the invitation about digital sovereignty. This is something that was championed mostly by Germany, and it started 10 years ago, maybe, about this thing. Don't have the English word for it. But the interesting part about digital sovereignty is that it's a version of sovereignty, and sovereignty is something that nation states has. So in our case, Sweden is a sovereign nation. That means it's only the Swedish government and the Swedish parliament who can decide over Swedish territory, air, and the water surrounding Sweden. So it's only Sweden who can decide about that and what is okay and what is not, who can be here and who can't, and all kinds of things, and that's sovereignty. But what happens in the digital domain is that when we go digital, then a lot of things about our country is stored in digital, and it could be stored anywhere, and it can be processed anywhere, of course, even outside the borders of the country. And we haven't seen that as an issue. Again, we have championed free trade, and if we see that there's a digital solution from another country that is better than what we can produce ourselves, then we should use it. But what we've realized over time, and especially this year, is that it's the thing about nation state sovereignty in itself and the dependence on the digital realm is that is intertwined today. The digital is not its own domain anymore. Everything in Sweden is digital. We don't get water unless we have IT solutions. We don't get food. So that everything is highly efficient in Sweden in many ways, where we don't have a lot of warehouses where we store things in case something happens. Instead, we have our warehouses on trains and on trucks. So always producing for the immediate need. And that is, of course, extremely efficient and the cheapest way of doing things. But if something happens, then we have no margins at all. And that became obvious during COVID, that Sweden didn't have any stores or any sort of stored equipment for the healthcare. And we could see a big difference between Finland and Sweden, where Finland has always been, for them, it has been important to keep things going and that their civil defense must be high. So they had the equipment and Sweden didn't because we've sold it off or burned it. And that's different views on the thing of sovereignty. But today, as I said, the nation state sovereignty is dependent on being digital sovereign as well. And by that I mean no other nation state can decide for us by changing our data or removing our data or say that we can't have access to specific IT systems or specific data. So all of these could be tools to threaten another country that if you don't do as we say, then we will remove some kind of digital functionality or data for you. Because if another nation state can do that, then we can't say that we're a sovereign nation anymore. It's another nation that decides for us. So that's we've done this in become a very digitalized country, and that has been really, really good for many reasons. But in this geopolitical shift, now it's also a liability that we've sold out so much of our country's data and IT to other nations that we can't claim that we're a sovereign nation anymore. Here's a small, looks maybe very technical and talking about fiber, but this is just a small detail, but it could be interesting as well for how things are in reality. Sweden, Finland, and Norway is dependent on ocean fiber for connectivity, so internet connectivity and for telephones and all that. And there's a limited amount of fiber. Here you can see parts of the Baltic Sea and Kattegat and Skagerrak. And of course, there is fiber from Norway then to Iceland and to the UK. But if all of these fibers gets cut off, and we saw that especially last year with Russian and Chinese ships dragging the anchors and tried to cut off, or in some cases did cut off fibers. And that has happened in Norway as well, especially around Svalbard. So we will continue, probably continue to see that. If Russia would would invade Finland and Norway and Sweden, one of the earlier things they probably would do would be to cut all of these fibers. And that is not hard, it's not expensive, and it goes pretty fast. To repair them takes a really long time, and there is very, very few ships that even can repair fibers. So if that happens, Sweden, Norway, and Finland will be like an island that is cut off from the rest of the world. And when I say this, some say, but we could use satellites. Sure, but satellites is nothing compared to the bandwidth and the transmission capacity that is in all the fibers. So it's not a solution. So this is just reality, how it looks like, and a real threat, and it's already happened. And what hasn't happened yet is that we haven't had all the fibers cut off at the same point in time. But that means that this is also a threat we have to think about, and depending on what kind of solutions we build and how we want to make sure that the solutions we build work at any given point in time, depending on, of course, how important the solution is, maybe this is something you have to take into account. So if you can create a service that says, yeah, our service will still function even in this scenario, it's of course better and a more safe solution that you built. GDPR, I won't delve much into it. I guess you know a lot of stuff, and I assume you've heard lots of stuff about GDPR before. The only thing I wanted to add now is what's happening again in the United States. We have the data privacy framework in place between the European Commission and the United States government, and that is still in place. So from a strict legal standpoint, it's still valid to use American suppliers for processing personal data. But the political decision between the United States and the European Commission is based on what is called the PCLOB, which is an oversight board in the United States, and that is a function with multiple people from both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party who's in that board. But what Trump has done is he has fired everyone but one. So that board is currently just one person. So the board is not functioning anymore, which means that one of the underlying pillars for the data privacy framework is in reality non-functioning. So there is a push to the European Commission to see if the data privacy framework really is valid anymore. There hasn't been an answer yet, but if they would look into it, everyone I've been listening to that is much more involved in the question than I am says that, yeah, it's basically dead already. But again, there's two things. It's, as I say, it's basically dead, but from a formal standpoint, it's still there. But again, if you're going to base your solution and you process personal data and you're basing your solution on an American provider, thinking that the data privacy framework is there and it's valid, that is a very shaky thing to do currently. Next thing is about secrecy. In Sweden specifically, we have the offentlighets- och sekretesslag. I don't know the English name for that, but it's the law that says that sort of in Sweden we have that all information from the public sector is public to anyone and everyone, unless there's a reason it must be kept secret for a limited amount of time. And that is what offentlighets- och sekretesslag is trying to find out, sort of where do we draw the line and when can something be secret. And this is, of course, always a thing when you sell in Sweden, because if you're selling to the public sector, sometimes there will be stuff involved that is secret. And some is very, very simple, like public procurement, where of course everything regarding the procurement process and the bids and such is of course secret until the procurement process is finalized. And it's of course of high importance that everything is secret during the process. Otherwise, someone could have, you see the point. We could see lots of bad things happening if you're procuring and the secret is not upheld. But there's many other areas of secrecy. We have, of course, stuff that is regarding the military defense. We have things regarding personal data and health data, and there is all kinds of things in the law. But here as well, we have to think about if we build a digital solution, how do we uphold the secrecy? Can we prove that there is data in the service and it must be kept secret? How do we prove to the customer, or sort of say that you have a public sector customer, how can you prove to them that the secrecy will stay put? How would you prove that it will be kept secret? Then you have to prove that you've built your IT solution that will handle the data in such a way that the secrecy can never be broken, unless you could of course have like a Swedish court demands you to hand over something, but that is within the legal system. But there could be other areas where the secrecy could be broken, and you could have like support staff, and you could have who owns encryption keys if your data is encrypted, because that is always the answer that you have, that, oh, but everything is encrypted, so it is secret. But it's not so easy. Encryption is hard, and a lot of times the encryption is done by encryption keys that is stored at the service provider. And then, of course, the service provider can, in theory, decrypt the data. And if they can you still prove then that the secrecy is upheld? Probably not. So there's lots of things here, and again, depending on your IT provider, this looks different. But it is really important, of course, for public sector customers, and also some other kind of areas. You can have like law firms that has to uphold the secrecy for their customers, and there's multiple others. So you have bank secrecy as well, and so forth. So I would say, based on a lot of the stuff that I've been talking about, we can look at sort of where you host your IT solutions is in like a continuum. And there is not one answer, and this is the important thing, what I was trying to show in this picture, that it's not a one size fits all, or you always have to do everything by yourself, or it doesn't matter who does what, just if it's cheap, then that's good enough, or such. It's not a good way of thinking. So what I'm trying to show here is that on one side you have a rack of servers, and what I mean by that is that you own everything yourself. You're in the data center you can control, you own the servers, and it's only your own staff that has access to the servers and can do things, and you can bind your staff with legal contracts, and you can make sure that they never say anything about anything because it's your staff. So if anyone asks you, so how do you keep things safe? And where is my data? And you can say, well, Mr. and Mrs. Customer, you can join me to my data center and I will show you where everything will be stored. And this is the only place it will be stored. And if they ask who will have access, well, it's our engineers. You can have the names of the engineers, and they are vetted. They maybe have security clearance, or depending on the service, what is needed. So that is sort of one of the extremes, but in a lot of occasions, that is what you have to do to be able to live up to all the legal requirements and all the customer requirements. The next step is going to say, but I don't need to have control on that level. It's enough that I use a Swedish company. And for that, in this scenario, it's you're a Swedish company and you're selling to a Swedish customer. Of course, you can exchange this with other countries, of course, if needed. But in this case, with the customer demand, maybe say, yeah, but it's okay that your data is stored somewhere, but it has to be stored in Sweden. And it has to be only Swedish citizens that can work with the servers and have access to the data and the systems. And only Swedish law applies to your company and the infrastructure provider that you use and so forth. The good thing about this is that you don't have to run the servers yourself. You can sort of rent capacity from someone whose main business it is to do that. So that you gain that, but you also say, but it's only Swedish law that applies. So offentlighets- and sekretesslagen, and also GDPR, and there could be other laws regarding health data and so forth that is very specific Swedish. There's also a law about silencing, so tystnadspliktslagen, that you have to, even if you know things, you are by law not allowed to tell anyone about it. That's what it's about. And that's a Swedish law, only applies to Swedish companies and Swedish citizens. So that could also be an important factor when you are building your service and where data is stored and where the application is running. Next step, I think you're starting to get where I'm going with this. You could have a European supplier, European Union, we have the inner market, so GDPR always it's not an issue at all. You will have a little bit more issue with offentlighets- and sekretesslag. You will have that the tystnadspliktslag is not applicable anymore. But still, we must trust the other European Union member states, and we want the inner market to function. So maybe it's fine with using a German provider or a French or a Spanish or whatever. What you could have then is a little bit less legal certainty, of course, because then becomes, so if you're using a German provider, you have to think maybe about German law and what the German government can force a German company to do or not to do. But overall, it should be pretty safe, but you lose some things, but maybe you get a lower price or a service that has more functionality that you need. And that could be, and if you don't see a legal hinder, then that could be very well be a solution that you could use. Next up is the United States. And we've been for a very long time seeing that, of course, we can use US, especially US cloud providers, and many organizations do. And that has been sort of okay. We've always had a problem with offentlighets- and sekretesslag, where all lawyers who've looked into it says it doesn't function really well. We have the thing with GDPR, and as I said, there's an issue now with, is GDPR really working with American suppliers at all? We will see. But what's happening, as I said before, is that the United States sadly is moving towards the Chinese direction. So definitely moving away from being something we could and should use. And it's really sad because a lot of the American providers they have good services. But for many reasons, and sort of, I said before, it was a lot of legal discussions, especially around secrecy and GDPR. But now, as I said, this is more of a geopolitical dimension. Could we even trust an American supplier? Could Trump force an American supplier to do things? And the answer there is yes. We've already seen it. Trump did it in his first term, so back in 2019. He signed an executive order that American service providers should shut off their services to the country of Venezuela. And some companies did. The most notable one was Adobe, but there was some others as well. And after a few months, he changed back, and that was over. But we've seen this year, when he was angry at Zelensky after the meeting in Washington, he ordered the American private company Maxar Technology to not sell their satellite image to Ukraine, and that was for like a week. And also Microsoft had to shut down two Chinese universities a couple of weeks ago. We don't know why yet, or I haven't read it anyway. But it's obvious by just looking at reality that Trump knows he has a really potent weapon in his arsenal, and that is that a lot of the world outside China and Russia are very, very dependent on American IT services, and he knows how to use that weapon. And that is the reason, if you check media about Denmark, that Denmark has really woken up to a very harsh reality, and that is that Trump says he wants Greenland, and one of the tools he could use is to say to Denmark, well, if I don't get Greenland, I will tell Google and Apple and Microsoft and AWS to shut down all their services to the entire nation of Denmark as of tomorrow. That is fully plausible. If I would be telling you this a couple of years ago, you would probably just laugh and think that I was a tinfoil hat or a maniac. But today, it's the harsh reality that could happen. And if that would happen, the thing that I've read is that the Danish society will probably collapse within a few days. Nothing will function anymore in Denmark. The whole of government, municipalities, healthcare, the food, sort of the agriculture, food industry, everything is reliant on American cloud services. So if they get shut off, nothing will function in Denmark anymore. And it would be the same in Sweden, but we don't have yet the current threat as Denmark have. So in Denmark, there's a really healthy discussion on governmental level that Denmark has to change quickly to have a much better market, and they need to find European and Danish IT providers so they can remove a lot of the dependence from the United States. It's not an either or protectionist thing. It's just like life insurance. It's really good to have in that sense. And lastly, China. But very, very few companies have anything in China or uses Chinese suppliers when it comes to like cloud services. We are very dependent though on Chinese hardware, even though not super dependent, but there's a lot of the factories are in China, but they are also moving to Thailand and Vietnam and India and Philippines and so forth. So manufacturing stuff can easier, it's more easy to move to other places if that is needed. But I would say that China is like the other end of the spectrum from running everything yourself. So I hope this was giving some kind of picture of where things are. And what I want to point out with this is it's not so easy as to just say we should do this, or we always have to use Swedish or European or American or whatever. It's usually a silly discourse to have. It all depends on the system you're running and the data that is in the system, and who is the customer, who is the user of this data, and how important is it for the country to run. Some stuff we can miss, sort of it doesn't matter if they're gone tomorrow, but other stuff, it is really important that it's always there. So you have to think it through. Again, a couple of years ago, we didn't have to have this discussion as much, but now I would say it's crucial that you have this discussion and think it through on how you build things. And this goes all the way down to where is the data center and who owns the data center and where are the engineers who run the data center and run the infrastructure. You have to go all the way down. And you can't just trust promises from companies that says, oh, what is fine, and we have so good IT security, or all kinds of promises. It doesn't mean much. So the American cloud providers can say all they want, but in the end, they are American companies, and they must follow American law, and they must follow what the American government says. There is no way around that. Sad to say. Really last bit of a thing that has happened. So if we're in this scenario now where I say there is a lot of stuff that's happening that is not really good, but there's also, of course, push to change. And one of the interesting pushes is the initiative called Eurostack, which is all kinds of industry players. You can see some of the logos there on the side. Mainly it's IT companies, but there are also some industry companies like Airbus. And there's also venture capitalists and others. Have joined together and tried to influence the European Commission to do changes to European public procurement law. Or there's more things to it, but that is, I would say, the main thing. So if that happens, then the European public sector will be forced by law to buy more European IT solutions. And that is the idea behind that, is that then European IT companies will grow faster, pay taxes in Europe, and hire more engineers, build better services, better products, and they will grow, and then we will have a more level playing field with more choices to choose from. So it's not an either or, it's not a ban USA or ban China or any such. It's more that there is a need for European IT companies to be there as well. With the geopolitical landscape, we think it's really necessary. So that was it, and we have 17 minutes for questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Daniel, for sharing your experience and perspective on this important topic. Lars.
Yeah, thank you, Daniel. Not so funny to hear about, but here is what it is. We are using AWS, and we are storing everything in Ireland. Can we do a quick change to something instead in Sweden?
If you should.
No, can we?
Then it becomes the statistician's answer. It all depends. So in the case of, depends on how you built your application. What you could do when you're looking at like Microsoft and Google and AWS is that they have a huge portfolio of functionality. And some companies, when they build their application, they are not using so much of that functionality. They use more basic functionality like virtual machines, storage, containers, and such. And if that's the case, then it's usually fairly easy to move to another cloud provider.
Yeah, but I still need a platform, doesn't I? Isn't
a platform?
The AWS platform.
No, but the services they provide are pretty generic, but they. So if you just say the simplest thing, you buy a virtual machine, you're renting a computer from someone else, and you built everything inside it. You install the operating system and your application and database and all of it inside that. Then you can take that virtual machine and say, for example, talking for myself, you can go to Safespring and say, hey, I have a virtual machine in AWS. Can I move it to Safespring? And I would say, yeah. Without too much work, that is perfectly doable. But some use, again, taking AWS as an example, they have logging solutions, search solutions, specific. They have a specific database that only AWS provides, and a lot of other functionality. So if you're building your applications with all these specific sort of building blocks that AWS provides, then it's only AWS who provides that set of functionality. You can't even move to Microsoft or to Google without a lot of work, because you've become locked in to an ecosystem of functionality. And in the beginning, that is usually sort of, it feels really good because I don't have to do this or this or this or this, because it's all provided for me. And the functionality that AWS provides is really good. There's no doubt about that. So it seemed like a smart thing, usually, that sort of you build it on top of that, and the only thing you have to do is provide the smart things and build the application thing. But you have so much functionality already there. So if you look at the total stack of software needed to run your application, maybe just like 5 or 10% is your own. The rest comes from the cloud provider. But again, as I said, then you're locked in, and then it's really hard to move because you've built it with their APIs, their way of doing things, their proprietary databases, and so forth. Again, if the sun is shining, everything is fine. There's no worries.
I know, because I changed it from Microsoft to AWS, so I have built my solution twice, and that has also cost twice.
Yeah. So then, but there's many ways of trying to build more cloud agnostic. That is, I see a current trend, and I see many consultants also helping with this and say, remove the specific things that requires a specific cloud provider to run it. So typically that's where containers come in. So you build with container technology, and that is, and there's Kubernetes for that. And then it's, again, fairly easy to change cloud provider.
Okay, thank you.
My pleasure. I know there's something in the chat, but that was maybe not questions, because I couldn't see the chat when I was talking.
I think so, but I can see Gert-Olov.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you, Daniel, for a very good presentation of the present situation in the world. We are a little startup company, and these comments seem rather overwhelming to take into our situation. So I would like you to help me to navigate. I mean, you said we can't trust the data providers, and if we ask them, we can't trust what they say. They might have some employee that goes radical and destroys the whole database that is in the data server, etc. So I mean, there are so many things to consider. How do you suggest that we navigate? We have a service that depends on data that we are storing at an external provider, and our users are kind of depending on this data they collect and compare over time what they do. How should we think in this navigate in this territory, and with these things happening and possibilities to happen, etc., and so on?
Yeah. First, just one thing, that an employee sort of goes rogue and does things.
Yeah.
Of course, in theory, possible everywhere. I mean, Gert-Olov, you could go rogue tomorrow. So
yeah,
it's like, sure, but then you have backups. That's what one of the things that backup is for, and you could always and also have the backup somewhere else at some other provider. So the rogue one, but I think we'll leave that discussion. But I would say so that the way of thinking is to start by, if you have built an application and you're selling that application to someone else, and then it's sort of, I would start with, who are your customers, and what are your customers demanding from you? So if the application is sort of handles just simple data, and that the customers say, we don't care, your applications can be run in China, it doesn't matter at all because there's no legal requirements or any other. So we just want the cheapest possible service. Yeah, then build a cheap service then, and the customer has sort of no requirements. That is quite uncommon, of course. And again, it's a continuum of different applications and different kind of data, and the customers, of course, are different. But if you are mainly selling to the Swedish public sector, for example, and they say, but well, you have to prove that you handle personal data and secrecy and other things correctly, then I would suggest today, and I'm not, again, I would have said the same thing when I was at the tax agency. So don't take this as sales talk from me being at a cloud provider. But with the current landscape that we have and the risks I see involved, I would say for many reasons, I would go with a Swedish provider. And that is, you would have so much legal certainty when doing that. So when you go to the customer and you say, our whole solution is Swedish, then if you're selling to public sector, they will be so relieved. So you mean say, oh, so there's no American or Chinese, and you're like, no, we're using a Swedish provider and we are a Swedish company. Only Swedish law applies. The lawyers at the municipality or region or whatever will be so happy because it makes their job very, very easy. And what that also means is that when you are selling your functionality, your application, you can focus on talking about your application and how good it is and what kind of functionality you bring, instead of talking data privacy framework or Trump administration or weird things happening, because that's not what you want to do. You want to focus on selling your application, which is your business. So you will have so much ease of mind by saying that everything is Swedish and within Sweden. So that's sort of, again, I'd said the same thing. And I did a lot of these things at the tax agency when different companies wanted to sell solutions. And I've been in the process many, many times of looking into different software providers. And when you look into them, somewhere was an American provider or something. And we said, no, we won't buy it at that point in time. And again, it took hours and hours and talks and sending papers. And that has nothing to do with what you want to do. And you will always feel a bit insecure and saying, but have I done this right? Or have I put encryption correctly? Or have I the right legal terms and whatnot? But there is simple ways of not doing that. And that is by not using these kinds of cloud providers. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. And if we go beyond the step of having a Swedish provider, is it anything other you think that we should consider? And I also would like to add the dimension of be proactive and not be reactive. I would like to be ahead of the Swedish public sector. Or at least understand what might come as the next step from them, etc.
That's hard for me to. Yeah. My guess would be as good as yours, I think. Yeah. But again, there are. I think you again by using creating a fully Swedish solution will at least lower your risk for things happening, because if there would be a new law from the EU or from in Sweden, I mean, we will all be affected, and it will work out fairly easy that we're all sort of affected by the same law, and much easier, instead of having to keep track on American law and American executive orders and stuff and try to find out what happens. It's much harder. So from that point of view, it sort of makes sense. The other thing is to, of course, encrypt things. So when you're building is not, and do this kind of zero trust architecture and say that all data is encrypted at storage when stored or transported, or depending on, again, of course, on sort of how sensitive is the data. But it can never really hurt to do it. And again, if you're talking to a customer and they ask about your security, you can say, well, we do encryption here and here and there. And again, the customer or the potential customer will, of course, say, well, you seem to have thought things through. Your solution seems to be secure from an IT perspective and a legal perspective. Then it all comes down to your price and your functionality. And that's what, again, that's where you want to be in the discussion with a potential customer.
Good. Thank you very much, Daniel. Thank you for an interesting presentation, one that is needed to be updated on. It's fairly easy to suppress what's happening and stay just focused here. So this was very good information, and being updated and starting to realize how they are dismantling the democracy in the United States.
Yeah, it's a horrible situation, I would say.
Yeah.
But any more questions? Did you pick anything up, Lisa?
No, I don't think we have any more questions.
That was just a comment from Marie.
Yes.
Yep.
He was
Thank you,
thanking
Marie.
for the lecture. And otherwise, I think if you'd like to get in touch with Daniel after this session, we'll be share his contact details along with today's presentation after this session. And thanks again for today, and I wish you all a great rest of your day, and see you soon again.
Thank you
very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.